been exactly a year since Illinois eliminated cash bail. The state Supreme Court cleared the way for the Pretrial Fairness Act to go into effect September 18th of 2023.
And that started a new era for the state's criminal justice system. Illinois Capitol Bureau Chief Max Cotton takes a look at how the new system has worked over the past year.
I think we've seen a lot of changes in terms of the pretrial process.
David Olson has been studying the new cashless bail system for the past year. He says he feels many of those changes are for the better. Under the law, instead of a bond hearing, if someone is charged with a detainable offense, there has to be a real hearing to determine whether the defendant must remain in jail.
The hearings now that are being held when someone's pretrial freedom is at stake are much more thorough. They're much more deliberative. They're taking longer. When judges reach a decision about whether or not to detain an individual or not, it's based on a thorough examination of the evidence in the case.
He says bond hearings used to last an average of about 4 minutes, while the new detention hearings last about 16 minutes on average. One thing he says that hasn't changed a lot is the number of people failing to show up to court. His data shows the number of defendants issued a failure to appear warrant went down from 17 to 15% during the first 6 months. He also says during the first half of 2024, crime rates across the state did not go up. However, that data cannot be directly linked to the new law.
There's a lot of research that suggests that people posting money isn't what gets them to court. It's being reminded that they've got court, it's ensuring that they've got access to transportation.
In addition to eliminating cash bond, the new law also created a state office of pretrial services. Despite the preliminary data, however, Republican lawmakers who oppose the original legislation say the law needs work. State Senator Jill Tracy says judges need more discretion to detain people, particularly in burglary and retail theft cases.
More detainable offenses now that we've seen it in action, and because we're seeing that in retail theft and burglary, there's no deterrent for them to keep doing what they're doing.
She says she'd like to see all felonies be detainable offenses, as well as domestic violence, assault, or harassment cases. Right now, only Class 3 and above felonies are detainable, as well as domestic violence, battery, and violations of orders of protection. In Springfield, Max Cotton, WGEM News.
Tracy says she's also concerned about increased financial and staff burden the new law has put on state's attorneys' offices and public defenders' offices, especially in smaller counties.